to another episode of Flipping the Barrel, a podcast where we interview energy leaders in the space to uncover and find out more about their careers and life journeys. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing Andy Krieger, who is the Senior Vice President of BP's Gulf of Mexico and Canada region. Andy has more than 25 years of leadership experience in the energy industry. Prior to his current role, he served as Senior Vice President of Wells for the organization for 6 years. Andy is the chairman of the board of directors of BP's Exploration and Production and is a member of the BP America Board of Directors. He is on the API Upstream Committee and a member of the NOYA Executive Committee. Andy lives in Houston, Texas with his lovely wife, Kimberly, and their 2 daughters. Andy, I have no idea how you have time to do this podcast after everything I just read of all the great things that you're part of. So thank you so much for spending some of your busy schedule with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation and excited to see where we can get with it.
Well, Andy, we've had the pleasure of meeting your wife and also your daughter, Caitlin, and they're both incredible individuals. So we couldn't wait to hear from you and get to know more about you and your upbringing. So let's just start from the very beginning. So Andy, you were born in a great town in Wyoming, where you were raised by a really caring and loving and devoted family. You spent a lot of times outdoors, which I can imagine in Wyoming, there's so much to do there when it comes to outdoor activity. Not so much like in Texas. You've got a lot of just open fields there, which is really nice. And early on, you demonstrated a lot of work ethic. You engaged in various jobs, from being a truck driver to electrician apprentice to this, all different sort of things that you did, just showing that you had hard work and that hard work ethic. You inspired, actually, you had a passion for flying. So you wanted to be a part of the Air Force Academy, but unfortunately that didn't work out in your favor. And that kind of influenced you to go into engineering. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your childhood and how living in Wyoming and having that kind of work ethic and also having those aspirations to fly, but then having to take a step back, really what that taught you at such an early age?
Yeah, certainly. I did. I grew up in a very small town in Wyoming, and it was a great environment, great upbringing. And you talk about the various roles that I had, the jobs I had. I had a great role model, my father. He just has an amazing work ethic, and at 83 today, he still works every day in his yard or in his shop, and that was kind of the role model and the benchmark that I had growing up, and had the opportunity to start helping with him, and then very quickly moved into roles in oil and gas. There were really in that small rural environment, there were really only kind of 2 options. You either worked in an oil and gas environment or you worked in ranching, and I had the opportunity to take on a number of roles in oil and gas. It was just kind of what we did. If it was if it was broken, you fixed it with what you had. I think you talk about the dream that I had at the time to fly and the life turn that I had there with that. I think what I've learned in life and really by extension in my own career is that it's never linear. I think you always have a vision of where you're headed and what you want to do, but very, very seldom is our path actually linear. And I think really what it taught me was how important it is to keep things in perspective and focus actually on what you can control. Because I think I look back at some of the biggest decisions that I faced. Oftentimes there's actually not a right or wrong answer, because often these choices are very complex. There's a lot of things that weigh into it, internal, external things that you can control. But there's different outcomes. And I think really what makes things, right or wrong is more a function of how you relate to that outcome, versus the decision itself. So, but, as for flying, held on to that dream and actually some 30 years later did get my pilot's license and actually went flying yesterday. And it's still something I enjoy immensely. And so, sometimes you take a detour. In this case, it was a 30-year detour, but there you go.
I love that. It's when it's a passion, it still lingers there for the rest of your life. So I'm glad you got to fulfill it, even if it was 30 years later. So tell us a little bit after a few months of soul searching, with when this happened, and then you had to kind of get back on the path in a new direction. You decided to pursue a degree in petroleum engineering at the University of Wyoming. Having grown up around the oil field, it only felt like the right choice. When you graduated, your first job was for BP in Alaska. Can you tell us a little bit of how you adapted from being a student to now a professional engineer working on the North Slopes with a lot of responsibility? And what advice would you give someone starting their first job today when they just got their engineering degree and they struggle to go from student to professional?
No, yeah, I think, my advice would actually be pretty simple, and it would be, for people to just be themselves. I think the challenge I see with some folks that are just starting out is they think that they need to be, some internal image they have of what the company or their supervisor, wants them to be. But the people that I come across, and anyone who's graduated and starting a new career, they have a great success and have realized great success already in their career, and I think really all they need to do is build on the habits, build on the approach that have made them successful today, and to be curious. And I think if there was one simple lesson that I learned, is never pretend to know more than you do. I think we have a great industry with a lot of experienced people that want to share that and leverage that. And the best way to do that is just be honest about what you know and what you don't know.
I think that's so important, especially in that early stage of development. And when you're trying to learn from others, and at the same time, you want to ask those questions, especially then when it's okay. It's always okay to ask questions, but definitely when you're starting out. You were able to work in the field very early on in your career, and field experience is really important for anybody working in the oil and gas space, have that be if you're working for an operator or service company. How important do you think it was for you, and what kind of experience do you think that gave you as far as understanding, what the industry maybe needed or what the requirements were, and also how the field workers work and how important they are for the industry?
Well, as you said, I think it's incredibly important, and actually I think it's important for any discipline in our business, whether that's you're in engineering and finance, subsurface, HR, supply chain, all of us. Something that people in my organization will hear me talk a lot about is that all of us here, in the office, as it were, in Houston, we're actually here to support the men and women that are out there, whether that's offshore, on a drilling rig, on a platform, on a location, onshore. I mean, that is our role, is actually to support them. And it's so important to remember, where our business really happens and what makes a difference. And I think the exposure, the experience that people get by working in that environment gives them a deeper understanding of what it actually takes to get things done. What are the real challenges that teams face in execution? And in some places that may be the weather, in some places it's space constraints, it's logistics, and on a personal level it could be things as simple as working a rotation. And I just think without the benefit of really understanding and having experienced some of those various components, I think it really limits someone's ability to be the most impactful that they can be. And I think it's still something today that I try to keep front and center. A very simple example is in my current role, the most basic of question that I might ask without really thinking through the consequences can end up creating a massive amount of work. So I think I would highly encourage anybody, especially earlier in their career, to get that exposure, irrespective of what discipline you're in, to be able to make that connection and really understand and test the impact of the choices, the decisions, the work that you create and that you drive into the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that you mentioned that not only just people in engineering should visit the field or be part of the field, but really anyone that works in the industry. Because to your point, I think sometimes it would make more sense when, even if you're in logistics or supply chain, you understand maybe why things aren't working once you send them out there, or why it takes certain parts. And so I think it would just, to your point, make everything better, and you can relate to those women and men working out in the field who are, keeping our lights on every day. One thing we wanted to ask you is, you mentioned you met your wife, Kim, in college, so super early on, and you both went into the same company and had a dual career together. You've both been together for over 2 decades and have always supported each other's careers and ambitions and building a beautiful family. It's rare that we find these kind of couples. So we just wanted to understand a little bit about, how have you guys been able to manage not only just, your marriage, but your careers together, and you're both extremely successful, right? We usually see, a great couple, but there's always like the leading career, and then the other person that either stays home or also has a career but isn't as successful. So it's really interesting to see just how you both managed to do this.
Well, actually, I have to acknowledge it's probably closer to 3 decades than it is 2, but I'll take that. It won't show my age, and honestly, just something I'm incredibly thankful for. I think, well, you both know Kim and have had the chance to talk to her and get to know her a little bit. And I'll just start with how fortunate I am, to have found a partner in Kim in the way that I have, because it really starts there. I mean, I have to acknowledge that. If I think about, what's worked for, or what's the approach we've taken, what's worked for us, I'd like to say I think we've both been very patient, supportive, and communicate. I think communication is absolutely key. And I think what I wouldn't want to describe is a situation where, a bit like what I said before, life is never linear. Neither is your career. That we had some kind of master plan that we've just been executing over the last, several decades. I think, we've had to maintain great alignment throughout that time. At different points in our career, it's meant give and take on both sides, because, like I said, it's never linear. And I think one recognition that I would make is that you have to be really clear on what the priorities are, and I think it's collective priorities, it's individual priorities, it's priorities as a family, and that those evolve over time. They're not fixed in time, as you have, start a family, and a number of different factors can really play in. So I think I've just had the benefit of having someone as special as Kim that I've been able to partner with. I think we've maintained good alignment, challenged each other, maintained that open communication, and we make joint decisions. My previous role, I led the Global Wells Organization, and knew that role, when I was offered that role, was going to require a significant amount of international travel, almost to the extent of working a rotation. And if I just use that as one example, before I accepted that role, it was something I discussed at length, actually, not only with Kim, but my 2 daughters as well, because it really does, affect everyone. So I think, it's just about being, I think it's about being open. I think it's about being honest, transparent, and maintaining a good line of communication.
Was there ever a time during both of y'all's relationship and career where y'all had to decide to take one role over the other, just depending on, what would happen based on like the family experience or the family dynamic? And if you did, how did you decide which direction to go? Because I feel like that's when a lot of people end up getting into that spot where they don't know what to do anymore, because they don't have equally, just like, they want to go 2 different directions. So can you help us with, like, people might be going through that? How were you able to make that decision?
Well, I think actually, I think it's occurred in both of our careers at different times where, opportunity had presented itself. And, one of us, we either took that opportunity up and that had implications, or we forewent that opportunity. And, of course, that had implications as well. And I think it's a little bit what I tried to share before, where, just through that, that open conversation, understanding that the choice that we had at that given time, whether it was my choice or whether it might have been Kim's choice, that there was really no right or wrong answer that was going to set us on a different path, and just kind of really being honest about what that path meant and making sure that we were comfortable with that before we made it. Because, like I said, many of these decisions are are very, very complex. They're not black and white. And I think, just continuing to stay in that open conversation, understand kind of the range of outcomes, and really making sure that that both individuals, both parties are comfortable with, those various outcomes is important. And, as we've talked through that in some occasions, we recognize that actually what we thought might have been the best path, as we kind of tested that, we said, well, maybe it's actually not. So, I think it's just recognizing that there's, like I said, there's probably not a right or wrong decision, but how you end up relating to that choice is hugely important. And you have to be honest about that going in. Otherwise it's going to come back.
Yeah, to elaborate more kind of on this topic on just communication and also travel. You had one of your first international experiences was in Trinidad, and coming from a small town that maybe not be so diverse like as Wyoming, going to an area that is like could be somewhat of a culture shock. And especially, as your career progressed, y'all definitely had different international experiences with your family. How do you adapt to those kind of international travel, international opportunities, given that, especially in the oil and gas space, a lot of young people are driven to the opportunity of being able to travel globally. But although it always sounds really nice, when you end up doing it, sometimes it can have the reverse side effect on you. And it's difficult to be away from family from, X amount of years, or maybe the situation isn't what you thought when you went over there. Can you talk to us a little bit about just how do you adapt to those changes in culture and what your experience was?
Yeah, well, let me just start by saying, living and working in a different culture, in my opinion, is invaluable for anyone. I think when I think about what I got out of that experience, how learning to adapt my style, my approach, communication skills, all of those things, have to be, are tested and have to be adapted and modified to be successful in that type of environment. In terms of the approach, I think you just have to go into it, eyes wide open, and with a real dose of humility about, what you think to be the norm or the standard, or, the best way of doing those things. And, I had the great fortune of getting that experience early in my career. I think today it helps me look at issues from very different perspectives. It helps me think about things from a multitude of different angles. It was a hugely important element of my own, personal development, and one that, I think working for an international, oil or an international energy company, I've been able to leverage extensively, had the opportunity to work in over a dozen countries following that, and each one of them with their nuances and their individual challenges. But I think you got to go into it eyes wide open and with a real open open mind to say, what can I get out of this, and how can I develop?
I love that you mentioned that, especially because, very similar to what you said about the field, is just getting that exposure to how things work very differently culture-wise, and adapting your leadership style is crucial to be successful, because what could work in the US or Canada super well is not going to work the same in Asia or in Middle East. And so it's really nice that you mentioned that, and encourage anyone who is going through their careers to accept that international role. It could not always turn out the way you think it is, but you're always going to pull positive and negative things out of it and just put that in your backpack for the next position. So on the topic of leadership, we wanted to hear a little bit about your leadership journey, and what do you think makes a successful leader? And maybe what are some things that you've done over that experience and career path to invest in women and the next generation in general, and also just how your leadership style has changed? I'm sure you're not the same leader as 20 years ago. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I'd start with you really have to stay in touch with what's really happening. And I think so. The question is, how do you do that? Different people have different approaches. I think my focus and investment has really been always trying to present a very approachable demeanor, and inviting people into the conversation. And I think one of the old cliches about I always have an open door. Well, you can't just say that. I think you really have to demonstrate it and reach out and engage with the organization. I think, one of the habits I have is, I'll often reach, well deep into the organization to get a quick update or information rather than kind of go through formal channels, maybe to the disappointment or challenge of some of my directs. Sometimes I do it in a very respectful way. But I think it just lets people know that you're plugged in, and more importantly, that you're genuinely interested in what they're doing and what they're part of, and how you respond to bad news. I think can leave a lasting impression on people, because there will be a balance of good news and bad news. I think beyond that, I'd say having the humility to share, where I've had a struggle or I've had issues or I've made mistakes is massively impactful. And that's probably one of the things that took me longer to learn in my career than other things, was that openness and that transparency about what the challenges that you're faced. And like I said, you can't just say things. I think you really need to put your shoulder behind efforts. And I think we've got some amazing talent here in our organization, and have really tried to support and enable what they're doing. Some of our women's organizations, like our Women in Wells, or the support groups that they have, our Male Allies group. I think not just saying you support, but really rolling up your sleeves, understanding how you can help, and getting involved. And I think it's important, to give our young people, give people early in their career, exposure to what they wouldn't otherwise get. One of the things that I enjoyed immensely was started up a shadowing program in my last role. So every year we give about a dozen folks over the course of the year the opportunity to actually shadow me in my role, attend the meetings that I attended, engage with my leadership team. And I think the feedback that we got from that was just tremendous. And I'm happy to say it's been picked up by a number of other groups here in our company. And I think it just makes can make a massive impact, and actually take away some of the mystery or the mystique about what actually happens around the leadership team. So you just have to put yourself in other people's shoes, and have the humility and the openness to learn from others. We also participated in a reverse mentoring program where I had a younger person assigned to me, and they were actually mentoring me on things that I didn't know as much about, whether it's data analytics or machine learning, et cetera. So I think being open to learn and open to share is something that just goes a tremendously long way, and you have to be involved.
I think the three main things that you just said that are really important, especially with the next generation that's coming up, is transparency. They want transparency. They want to know the real you. Having that shadowing, I think that's an incredible initiative. And just then being able to see and understand more about the organization. And then the reverse mentoring is, I think we can always learn something from somebody else, and it doesn't always have to be somebody who is, levels above you. So I think those three things are extremely important going into the next generation. And you have two teenage daughters, and they saw you and Kim work towards their career goals, and that's been very aspirational to them. And what kind of advice do you have for that age group that is going into the workforce in a few years? What would you tell them on their first day, if you're speaking to your daughters today or their friends?
Well, I get a bit repetitive, but I'd start here because it is something that's just really important to me, is just to be themselves. The success strategies and the things that have gotten them to where they are, they're equally valid in the work environment as they were in academia or in sports or athletics or whatever they may have been part of. I think I continue to see our industry and really all industries embracing inclusion in all dimensions, and a real desire to get the most out of everyone. Having said that, you have to be in the conversation. So I think the encouragement would be to be be in the conversation, to bring themselves into that conversation, to be themselves, but you have to be in the conversation. And I'm a big believer that nothing speaks louder than track record. And I think I would encourage them to think about their career, think about the development, but that at the end of the day, nothing speaks louder than track record. And I think this is something I've certainly experienced in my career, the need to support, the need to be an ambassador for young women, young engineers, young staff in general. But it's finding that balance of taking control, understanding what it is that you want to develop, and where you need to develop, asking for that help when you get it, and but actually always having it tied back to what does this mean in terms of what I'm currently delivering.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing, Andy. And we had another question for you on leadership, and just with 20 plus years of a career, I can just imagine how much advice you have from all of what you've been through, good and bad, right? Because like you said, no career is linear. It's not always a promotion after promotion. And so what would you tell us over all of those roles that you've had, leading variety of teams, different global perspectives, different responsibilities, some bigger than others, face several downturns? That's something we haven't really talked about that is crucial to the industry. What would you say is maybe one of the biggest lessons that you've learned, that kind of when you close your eyes, you think of this one moment where maybe, things didn't go your way, but you grew from it? What would that be?
Yeah, well, I think a bit anticlimactic. It's similar to what I was describing. I'd share with my daughters is the most important role. The most important role that you'll have in your career is the one that you're in. And I think it's just not getting so caught up in what's next, that you lose sight of making the biggest impact that you can possibly make, in the role that you're in today. And I think it's important to focus on that delivery and that track record,
Mm-hmm.
and not just kind of personal expectations. You got to be it's important to be clear what you're up for and the value that you think you can add. And I've seen that both ends of the spectrum when in coaching people. I think you talk to one half of one portion of the organization that don't understand why they can't have my job in 3 years, and there's another end of the spectrum where folks lack the confidence to be clear about the impact that they can have, and what their ambition is, and how you try to navigate that. But oftentimes that simple mistake that I can see people, or trap I can see folks fall into, is so focused on what's next and what's after that and what's after that, that actually kind of lose sight of the real value and importance of delivering in the role that you're in. And I can honestly say that's I think how I've held I've held it in my career, and still hold it to this day. But I think I just encourage people, you got to be really clear about your personal values. I think place a huge amount of value on not only your behaviors, but the behaviors you expect of others, and to just do the right thing. At the end of the day, if you do the right thing, and from the perspective of the organization, from the perspective of your own personal career, or the perspective of your family, at the end of the day, that's something you can stand by.
I think that's great. And I like that you talked about, the role that you're in today, because I think a lot of times we forget that where you're at today is you once dreamed of, and then you're always wanting to jump to the next thing, right? So be good in the role that you're at today as well, in order to progress on to that next opportunity, and to have that align with your family and your values and goals. To close, we at FTB are very big on really showcasing what the energy industry does for the world. We all see that the outside world maybe doesn't feel as positive about fossil fuels. We actually even have a Fun Fact Friday, we do every Friday with Combination of Liberty, to show the great things that are created from fossil fuels. This generation coming up, they're really big into the energy transition. They're big into trying to find new ways, new sources. They're scared to get into the oil and gas industry, even though we are the ones that will change and create change. What do you have to say to those that still are maybe on the fence of, what does this industry do, and what is the future of the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, it's it's a challenge that we all face, and I just appreciate the efforts that you guys are making in trying to help address that. What I'd say is there has never been a more exciting time to be in our energy industry in our industry, than that I've seen, and I see that excitement for decades to come. Yeah, I think the thing that we often lose sight of, or don't necessarily share to the full extent, is the genuine opportunity, the real accountability, whether it's the technical challenges, the risk that we manage, in a way that actually really appeals to that next generation. And I think the conversation is evolving. I think there's a lot of effort, like the effort that you're putting in to help, I think, really clarify for the world and those new students the role that we play in that solution, the importance and the role that we play in delivering the energy that the world needs, doing that safely, doing that efficiently, and doing that with lower emissions. And I think as we continue to build the narrative or clarify the narrative around the role we play in maintaining and improving today's energy system, which will allow us to create the energy system of the future. I'm hopeful that story will be, will tell a bit of itself. But I just think the opportunity that's in front of the organization, the industry that we have going forward is as great as opportunity as certainly I've been able to realize in my career, and I'm just really excited about where the next generation takes it.
Well, Andy, thank you for that incredible ending, and also just your perspective on not just your career, but also family life. Having your daughters and a successful wife working in the energy industry, really shows from your side, what y'all did to collaborate and communicate and get to where you are today, and all of the hurdles that you overcame, and just the success that you've had as a leader and the transparency that you have shown. Is one thing that Massiel and I really do appreciate about leaders like yourself, those that are open and honest, and we need more of those. We need more people speaking about where how they got to where they are today, and showcasing really the great people in the energy space. And so we just are very happy that you accepted our invitation, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity, and more importantly, thank you for all that you're both doing to advocate for our industry. Absolutely love your mission and behind it 100%. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy.
So if you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, follow us. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank y'all.